Ahead of ADPEC and indeed ahead of COP, we are combining the two and having a look at one of the biggest energy stories to come out in the last 24 hours. Saudi Aramco has launched a $1.5 billion sustainability fund. We're very pleased to be joined once again by Justin Dargin, global energy expert from the Carnegie Endowment think tank. He's speaking to us from Washington this morning. Justin, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
And the obvious question, why would the world's largest oil company launch what's effectively a green energy fund?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, one of the things that we can see is that prior to COP being held in Egypt, is that Saudi Arabia does want to burnish its green credentials, I guess you could say. But there are some internal dynamics that are extremely important to recognize why Saudi Arabia would do so. Saudi Arabia is experiencing a fairly high demand growth internally. And what it seeks to do is to reduce that demand growth, while at the same time, by renewable energy investment and so on, and then being able to preserve its export capabilities and able to obtain international prices for its oil exports. So that's one of the driving considerations. And another thing that Saudi Arabia wants to do is, and a big part of this fund is to promote the deployment of carbon capture and storage. So basically, carbon capture and storage would allow the continued utilization of oil and natural gas in the global economy. So Saudi Arabia sees that as one of its critical goals to reach and to promote this technology to the international market.
Okay, so there's a lot to break down there, including the type of technologies, carbon capture you've mentioned there. There are others that this fund might invest in. Before we do, though, let's have a look at one of its stated aims, which is to aid the green energy transition. The CEO, Amin Nasser, speaking at the big FFI gathering in Saudi Arabia, says that the transition from dirty energy, if you like, to clean energy is currently flawed. How so?
Well, he says as follows, basically because renewable energy is not able to pick up the slack at the moment. And he believes that it would take about 30 years or so for a true transition to happen. I guess to a certain degree that is correct if we look at the current volatility in oil prices. And of course, many of the countries that have stated they want to dissuade, we can say, investments in oil and gas are now attempting to encourage investments in oil and gas. So to a certain degree, I mean, he's absolutely correct in that. But one of the things is with the IEA's projection, it's that global fossil fuels will peak, more or less, the consumption will peak around 2030 or so. So during this time period, during this transitional period, there is going to be a bit of difficulty for the national economies in the world to be able to deal with that.
So he said you need a realistic plan. What is that realistic plan? What needs to happen?
Well, for a realistic plan, basically what you'd have to do, you would have to invest in oil and gas assets. And there is the consideration, of course, which Saudi Arabia does promote, is that when you do have a type of green policy and as Saudi Arabia would say, of course, trying to make the oil and gas industry a villain, then what it does is it will cause a bit of fear for oil companies. And they would expect that if they were to continue to invest significant amounts of money into oil and gas production, that they would essentially have a stranded asset as their assets would steadily depreciate. So Saudi Arabia is saying that that is one of the main problems and that it is these net zero commitments by many Western countries that is really causing the shortfall in oil and gas investment. So basically, you would have to have a predictable investment stream going to oil and gas assets, while at the same time attempting to buttress the investments in the renewable energy sector.
Okay, so let's look at that hedge, if you like, a $1.5 billion hedge into the sustainable energy sector. What kind of technologies could we see the fund invest in?
Well, the fund is going to invest in synthetic fuels, it's going to invest in hydrogen, and of course, CCS, so carbon capture and storage, which is a major one. And of course, carbon capture and storage is one of the primary technologies that Saudi Arabia feels will help it manage this global energy transition that is happening at the moment. So we're really going to see a big focus on that. And Saudi Arabia, in alliance with many international oil companies, is going quite strong with that. Now, if you look at environmentalists are basically saying that there should not be investment in carbon capture and storage because carbon capture and storage has, as they say, has been proven to be a bit risky. It's unproven. transition, and it would continue to lock the world into this hydrocarbon type cycle. But at the same time, there are others that state that we need to invest in whatever technology is available in order to stave off the climate change that is happening at quite a rapid pace. So you have these two ideas that are operating at the same time.
Right. So, yes, as you say, carbon capture has its detractors, those who point out that it still effectively is burning fossil fuels. What about those that are more true sustainable fuels, if you like, new fuels? Which of those alternative ideas could be the most viable or would be with money behind them?
Well, I mean, I guess you can say synthetic fuels to a certain degree. However, in the transport sector, which consumes, you can say, a very large percentage of the global oil trade, that's very difficult to transition over into. So we do see the rise in, of course, electric vehicles and so on. But in terms of where the oil is going to go, it would definitely go to the transport sector. So basically, I can't really foresee any type of synthetic fuels that would be able to supplant the oil that is going to the international transport sector at the moment. But if you look at, for instance, green hydrogen, that is what Saudi Arabia is looking at, considering to base its transition and diversification of its macroeconomy. So that is a big one. And also many other Middle Eastern oil-rich countries are looking at green hydrogen as a way to be able to help them manage the type of, let's say, movement or transition, of course, from an oil-based economy to an economy which is much more diversified.
Is a fund like this actually what's missing from the transition? If Amin Nasser says that it's flawed, is money the missing piece?
Yes, I would say that money is, but if you look at sustainability funds, investment funds at the moment, they are still kind of a very small piece of the pie. I mean, so they basically represent, I would say, about maybe even about 3% or 4% of the global asset wealth of investment funds. But yes, if you send money into renewable energy investment to sustainability, money talks, basically, and you will start to see movement. But it's also governmental policies at the same time. So when you have the governmental policies which will set up the basic enabling factors that would allow, let's say, the green energy ecosystem to flourish, then when these two combine, then you would definitely see the type of energy transition be realized that people are looking for.
Just before we let you go, 30 seconds left with you. The Saudi finance ministers told FFI the transition could take around 3 decades. What's your estimate?
Well, I mean, I'll say one thing is that you can have a black swan type of event. And this is what we've seen with the Ukraine invasion by Russia. This has expedited investment in governmental policies that support renewable energy. So I would say quite briefly, it's the security dimension of renewable energy now that governments are looking at, as opposed to just environmental considerations. So if you have renewable energy, it makes you much more energy independent, and of course would lessen the power of Russia and other bad actors on the international stage.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Justin Dargin, global energy expert from the Carnegie Endowment think tank, speaking to us on the launch of that $1.5 billion sustainability fund, transition fund, coming out from Saudi Aramco.